You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. At the same time, come on over and watch the video simulcast of this show over on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. You can find there the chat room, the live Intrepid chat room, which is going on right now. And it's just starting up. It's just getting fired up and ready to roll. So come on over, join the conversation, and you can watch the video simulcast of this show or play the audio broadcast over at Odyssey. Either one, but join that chat room because it's a fun place to get to know people and to get to talk a little bit more about the topic that we're discussing tonight. And so we want to welcome you to the program. I want to welcome you. I'm not a plurality. I'm not royal, so I don't speak of myself in the we. We are very pleased that you are here. What? And thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And I want to talk a little bit today about something that is a mythology that I never heard much about. I've only touched on it lightly here before, but this idea of there being in the biblical story of Adam and Eve, of there having actually been a woman prior to Eve, named Lilith, Adam's first wife. And so we don't think of the patriarchs as thinking that way, saying, well, Adam talking and referring, well, my first wife, she was a real bitch. And so, we don't hear that very much. So we're going to look at that a little bit. Who was Lilith? Who in the hell was Lilith? And maybe appropriately so, to put it that way. So, but before we do, I just want to thank you all for being here again and remind you that if you need any logo work done, illustration work, design work, anything a graphics house is going to do for you or your company, I'm your guy. ScottAllenRoberts.com. Come on over, see my work, and use me for some of your stuff if you'd like to. And we can do some good business together. So come over and take a look at my work. ScottAllenRoberts.com. At the same time, you can go over and take a look at my Etsy page. That's Etsy.com. /shop/ son of a patriot. Let's do that one more time. We'll type it and put it in the chat room for you, but it's Etsy, ETSY.com /shop/ son of a patriot. And if you're watching the video, you're going to see it right here, right behind my hand here. Oh, there it is. Right in front of the microphone. You're going to see son of a patriot. And so come on over, take a look at the stuff that we do. I've got all kinds of, I wonder if I've got any visuals up for it here that you can take a look at. Well, we've got the rocket tee, which is this one. That's the logo of this show that you can see there, the Intrepid logo. We've also got got that in black. You can see that. And we've got all kinds of designs. That's the beauty of the place. Son of a Patriot. It's got all the designs that I put together for different topics on this show and some of the political topics that we've talked about. There's patriotic stuff, Daughter of a Patriot. That's my rainy shirt right there, Daughter of a Patriot. Daughter of a Patriot and a redhead. There's also one in a blonde. It's funny. Guys are all okay if they just get this one, but all the women who want this shirt as Daughter of a Patriot want to make sure they can get it in the blonde or the redhead or the brunette. So we've got them all, folks. There you go. See? And so you can come on over to Son of a Patriot, find your shirt. We've got Rainy's UFO shirt. I don't have her picture up wearing it, though, here for you to look at. That's the coffee mug. That's the graphic that is on that coffee mug right there. And so you can see that coffee mug over at Son of a Patriot. So there's a big advertisement for all of my stuff. And so hopefully you'll avail yourself of some of that. You can find some fun designs over there. and pick something up for yourself or someone else. And that's it for the advertising portion of my show opener. We're only 5 minutes in. And I got in the show opener, the station identifier, the YouTube identifier, the YouTube chat channel identifier, welcoming you all, then talking about my website and the artwork that I do for a living, and my t-shirts and hoodies and stuff, all those designs. I did that all in 5 minutes. I had somebody once complain on one of my videos, I'm listening to this for 12 minutes and you're still talking about yourself or something like that, or all your stuff. And you know what? And that was before we were doing Odyssey Radio. And the show was an hour and a half long, where we were doing stuff, and I spent the first 12 minutes doing introductory matter and talking to you about my website and stuff like that, and stuff that I do. So, you know what? That's why I do this show. I do this show to benefit me. Yes, to benefit me. It's stuff I enjoy talking about, which benefits you, I hope. I make my friendships, that benefits me. I get information out there that benefits me, that benefits you. And I also advertise my stuff, which helps put food on my table, keep my lights on. So it's to benefit me, but it's also to give you something to enjoy listening to. So I hope you're all enjoying the kind of information we bring to the table and the things that we talk about. Last night was fun. That was fun going live. It was fun having Rainey here in the studio with me and talking our stuff. It's not always fun having the kids. Whenever they see Mom in here doing stuff, the kids like to come in here and invade as well. And I don't know what it is with our kids, because I think we're pretty darn good parents. We know how to parent. We know how to parent our kids. But we have an awful lot of, what would you call it in a word? I'm trying to think of a better word than just a typical disrespect or disobedience or something like that, a parenting word. We tell our kids to do something, hey, you got to stay out while we're doing radio, and they barge in anyway. And they barge in with things like, can I have a glass of milk? Can I, and so they're doing their stuff, or they're fighting or whatever amongst each other. They can't give us that 49 minutes without constant attention. So, and the little one's the worst. So there it is. It was a good time, though. Still last night. It was fun having Rainey here. And there. Now I've made it to 7 minutes and 45 seconds and haven't really started on a topic. So if you're one of those listeners who listen to this show and wonder why I'm not at the meat of things yet, it's because we're a family here. We talk about fun stuff. I talk about everything that's going on around us. And then we get into the meat of the show. So I hope you're going to enjoy that and that you have a good time with it. And tonight, if I jump right into it, we're going to talk about Lilith in the Bible and the mythology of Lilith. Who was Lilith? Who the hell was Lilith? Lilith is, when you think of Adam and Eve, you don't always think of Lilith. There's connections between Lilith, Adam's first wife, and Jadis, the White Witch of Narnia, which was a fictional character. And C.S. Lewis, who was one of the most beloved authors of the 20th century, created a magical fictional world called Narnia. And only in recent years did we see those being made into movies. And the primary villain of the first book of the series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is Jadis, the White Witch. And this is the character, Edmund's description of the White Witch when he first meets her in the book. He says, "She's a great lady, taller than any woman that Edmund had ever seen. She also was covered in white fur up to her throat, and held a long, straight, golden wand in her right hand, and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white like snow or paper or icing sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and stern." Now that's Jadis, the White Witch. She's beautiful, she's terrifying, and although she looks like a human, she's not. According to the character Mr. Beaver, there you go, the White Witch was was descended from Lilith, Adam's first wife, one on one side and from giants on the other side. So this is a fictional character, Jadis, and C.S. Lewis wrote her as being descended from Lilith on one side. So who is Lilith? Is there any warrant for calling Lilith Adam's first wife? Or is she just the baseless chatter of woodland creatures? Are there appearances of Lilith in other places in the Bible? So Dr. Ben Amos, a professor of folklore and Asian and Middle Eastern studies at the University of Pennsylvania, explored the figure of Lilith in the Bible and mythology. And I got a lot of this through Biblical Archaeology Review, is where I picked up these articles, folks. And his analysis shows that Lilith is an intriguing figure who's taken on many shapes over the millennia. And from this we see that Jadis, the White Witch, shares more than just lineage with her supposed ancestor. So this is an examination of how a fiction writer of the 20th century, was influenced by the Lilith character in Jewish mythology, biblical mythology. So Lilith is first mentioned in ancient Babylonian texts as a class of winged female demon that attacks pregnant women and infants. And from Babylonia, the legend of Lilith spread to ancient Anatolia, Syria, Israel, Egypt, and Greece. And in this guise, as this wilderness demoness, she appears in the Old Testament in Isaiah 34:14, among a list of nocturnal creatures who will haunt and destroy the kingdom of Edom. And this is her only mention in the Bible, but her legend continued to grow in ancient Judaism. I want to find that, by the way. Let's look up Isaiah 34:14. I want you to see what this verse says. It says this, in the New International Version, desert creatures will meet with hyenas, and wild goats will bleat to each other. There the night creatures will also lie down and find for themselves places of rest. Now you notice you don't see anything being said about Lilith there. Let's just see what the King James said. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The screech owl shall also rest there, and find herself a place of rest. And in some of the more modern versions of the modern vernacular, let's see if I can find a good one here for you, just to see how different it sounds. The American Standard Version says, and the wild beasts of the desert shall meet with the wolves, and the wild goat shall cry to his fellow. Yea, the night monster shall settle there, and shall find her a place of rest. Excuse me. And so there it refers to her in the female gender, the night creature. So this is who we're looking at here with this Lilith in Isaiah 34:14. She's the wilderness demoness. Now, and that's according to rabbinic writings that expound on this. Now, during the Middle Ages, Jewish sources began to claim Lilith as Adam's first wife. This demoness, this wilderness demon, this creature of the night. She was Adam's first and most and his terrifying wife. And so how did Lilith evolve from being a wilderness demoness to Adam's first wife? How did this come about in biblical mythology? How did it come out in rabbinic mythology? So interesting enough, the story begins at the beginning of Genesis 1. And the creation of humans is described in Genesis 1 and in Genesis 2. And the first account is fairly straightforward. It says, so God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. That's Genesis 1:27. Now the second account describes how God formed man out of the dust of the ground and then creates woman from the man. It says, "Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh, and the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man." That's Genesis 2:7 and 21 through 22. So in a post-biblical period, some ancient Jewish scholars took the stance that Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:21 through 22 must describe two different events, since it appears that the woman is created differently in these accounts. And it says he created man and woman. There they were. Then in another place, it says he created the man out of the dust and then took a rib and created the woman. So in her Bible Review article, Lilith, in the October 2001 issue, Professor Janet Howe Gaines explains this reasoning. She said, "Considering every word of the Bible to be accurate and sacred," now if you're Jewish and you're Christian, you're going to believe this, that the words are sacred and accurate, commentators needed a midrash, or a story, to explain the disparity in the creation narratives of Genesis 1 and 2. Now, the midrash are Jewish writings, rabbinic writings about the biblical text, the Torah. And so God creates woman twice, once with man, once from man's rib. So there must have been two women. The Bible names the second woman Eve. Lilith was identified as the first in order to complete the story. So according to Genesis 1:27, it describes the creation of Adam and an unnamed woman. We'll plug Lilith in there by the Midrash. And Genesis 2:7 gives more details of Adam's creation. He was made out of the dust of the ground. And Genesis 2:21 through 22 describes the creation of Eve from Adam. God took one of his ribs and created Eve. So Lilith's creation is recounted in the Tales of Ben Sira, an apocryphal work from the 10th century of AD. So we're talking the 900s. And AD, Dan Ben Amos explains that although this is the first extant text that records the legend of Lilith, her story probably existed much earlier. He said this. He said, "Lilith's story seems to hover at the edges of literacy with sporadic references. In the post-biblical period, the sages identify the Lilith several times, not by name, but as the first Eve, indicating that her full story was well known in oral tradition, yet barred from the canonized Bible." And so finally in the 10th century, in Babylon, an anonymous writer who was not bound by normative traditional principles and who included in his book some other sexually explicit tales, spelled out Lilith's adventures in paradise. So this is the Tales of Ben Sira, relates that God created Lilith from the earth, just as he had created Adam. That they immediately began fighting because neither would submit to the other. So recognizing that Adam would not listen to her, Lilith pronounced the ineffable name of God and flew away into the air. That's from the Tales of Ben Sira. Now the angels Snvi, and I don't know how to pronounce these, SNVI Snvi and SNSVI Snitzvi. I think they're pronounced probably very differently. And then a third one, SMNGLOF, Sminglingelaf. They were sent to pursue Lilith. But when they reached her, she refused to return with them to the Garden of Eden. So these three angels are chasing her down. You got to come back to the Garden of Eden, babe. "Leave me," she said. "I was created only to cause sickness to infants. If the infant is male, I have dominion over him for 8 days after his birth, and a female for 20 days. And so the Tales of Ben Sira, that's where that comes from. As a compromise, Lilith promised that whenever she saw the angels' names or forms on amulets, she would leave a child alone. So she also agreed that 100 of her children, demons, would die every day. Now, Janet Howe Gaines expounds the severity of Lilith's sin and its consequences as described in the Tales of Ben Sira. And she says, Lilith sins by impudently uttering the sacred syllables. That's the name of God, that secret name of God. And thereby demonstrating to a medieval audience her unworthiness to reside in paradise. So Lilith flies away, having gained power to do so by pronouncing God's avowed name. And though made of earth, she is not earthbound. Her dramatic departure reestablishes for a new generation Lilith's supernatural character as a winged devil. Now, this is the way that the mythology has evolved over the years. So Gaines also explains Lilith's hatred for human babies. Ben Sira's story suggests that Lilith is driven to kill babies in retaliation for Adam's mistreatment and God's insistence on slaying 100 of her progeny daily. So, and there's a lot you can read up about this stuff. I'm just giving you some highlights here. The Lilith legend continued to grow and change over the following centuries, which is reflected in various artistic depictions of her. While some portrayed Lilith as a beautiful woman, others showed her in a more sinister light. Some even depicted her as a serpent in the Garden of Eden. The serpent in the Garden of Eden. Not Nakash, who convinced Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Now, Jadis, the White Witch of Narnia, shares similarities with Lilith. Not only are both of them strong, terrifying women, but they also seem bent on destroying human life. Both wield dark magic, they're immortal beings, and as revealed in C.S. Lewis's The Magician's Nephew, Jadis gains immortality by eating a silver apple inside a walled garden in Narnia. And so this episode has some obvious connections to the account of the Garden of Eden in the Bible. Additionally, both pronounce an ineffable word, and they suffer dire consequences as a result. The Magician's Nephew tells how Jadis, before she became the White Witch, pronounced the deplorable word, which killed every living thing in her world, Charn, except for herself. So great was her desire for power and her refusal to submit, she spoke the deplorable word, knowing full well that it would kill every living person and thing in her world, rather than surrender her claim to the throne of Charn. And these examples demonstrate that the character of Jadis bears both blood and the character of the foremother Lilith. And so from demoness to Adam's first wife, Lilith is this terrifying force. And to learn more about Lilith in the Bible and mythology, you can go find Dan Ben Amos's full article from Eden to Ina, Lilith in the Garden. And we're going to take some highlights from that and talk about that when we come
Are you looking?
Gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, segment 2 tonight on, we're talking about Lilith, and you're listening on the Odyssey Radio Network, ODYSY1.com, to find out all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. You can come over also, watch the video simulcast, and join the live chat room over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Chat room's going on right now. Come on and join that fiery bunch of Intrepheads, and let's continue on talking about Lilith. And we're going to look at Lilith now. I want to glean some things from an article by Dan Ben Amos. He wrote about Lilith in the garden, from Eden to Edna. And for centuries, the paradise that was described in Genesis 2 through 3 has been a formative myth in Judeo-Christian culture. And the creation of the woman from Adam's rib, which we talked about in the first segment, both projected and validated a woman's more inferior and secondary role in Western society. So therefore, the new interpretation of the Hebrew word sela, shifting its meaning from rib to baculum, the penal bone, which Alan Dundes and Zioni Zevit have proposed, is nothing short of revolutionary. It shifts the whole mythic paradigm from an obscure derivation of woman from man to her primary and equal role in the procreative bonding. So the word sela, T-S-E-L-A in Hebrew, was the rib that was taken from Adam's side and created the woman, according to the way we had translated the word sela. Now, its meaning is actually baculum, which is the penal bone. So, if you have sensitive ears or children about, you might not, some of you don't care that much. It's good for them to hear these things. But we're talking about the man's junk, the manhood, the bone, the boner. This is the thing from which God created Lilith and created the woman. So it changes the whole role of who she is. Because the rib was supposed to show not the head bone, not the foot bone, but somewhere in the middle. She's just slightly lower than the man. That was the Western cultural interpretation of that. Saying the woman is just a little lower than the man. Well, not saying she's just as equal as the man in procreation. So, with this insightful analysis, Zevit and Dundee challenged this fundamental tenet of Judeo-Christian culture, and a basic principle that's been underscored and has underscored social gender relations for generations, especially in Judeo-Christianity. In recent public and academic discourse, these relations have been subject to intense examination. It generates changes in family and in public spaces of modern society. What might appear only to be a pedantic, philological, hair-splitting argument is in fact this radical change in the mythic model for relations between men and women. Dundes and Zevit still recognize that in paradise, woman was created from man. But instead of the sexually neutral rib, their interpretation recasts this whole creation in concrete sexual terms that are the basis of human regeneration. So let's unpack this a little bit. There's a lot of information there and a lot to look at. So it was Zioni Zevit who examined this basic philological aspect of his proposal. He points to the extensive use of the lexeme Sela, T-S-E-L-A. I just did some dyslexic reading there. Sela in the Hebrew Bible. It's from Genesis to the prophets. Yet it occurs only twice in Genesis. Genesis 2:21 and Genesis 2:22. And in the challenged meaning, that is, it's the rib. In all other occurrences in the Hebrew Bible, it clearly refers to the side of a structure, an object, or a mountain. And its meaning in biblical Hebrew, from Exodus to Ezekiel, the early 6th century BCE, that's what it meant, the side of a mountain, the side of a building, something like that. So in post-biblical Hebrew, the meaning changed. From the Hebrew of the Mishnah until the present time, Sela has come to refer to either a rib or side, depending on its context, or metaphorically, drawing upon the traditional interpretation of the biblical text, to wife. And now, it's quite true that in the biblical texts, there are no other examples of the word Sela as a penal bone. But words with unique meanings are not a rarity in the Hebrew Bible. A philological approach, then, to the problem would be to examine linguistic changes over time. Remember, I've told you before in many other instances how language means something, words mean something. The context of a word being used in a certain place at a certain time had meaning. And those words sometimes changed meaning. When we talked about one good example that pops into mind, when Cain murdered his brother Abel, and it says he left Eden and went to the land of Nod, N-O-D, and there he built a city and named the city after his first son Enoch. Now, Enoch was the word, and linguistically, the word to the letters of the word changed, the characters changed over time. And Enoch is actually the same as Uruk. Uruk being the same word as Enoch, and Uruk being the same word as Iraq. The first beautiful city is what that meant. And so you can see how linguistics changed not as much the meaning of the word, but the spelling in that case. And in many times you see the meaning changing. And if you take a look at a word in there, a philological approach to the problem would be to examine the linguistic changes over time, to seek out what the word meanings were in their historical contexts. A mythological analysis, however, especially in the structural method of let's look at one of these earlier researchers, Claude Lévi-Strauss, 1908 to 2009 he lived. He would collapse historical times into structures of these binary oppositions that represent thought, belief, imagination, and oral societies that did not necessarily have written language all the time, that people could read, literate societies. And so for this kind of analysis, the literate record of myth is accidental, depending on a literate person who happened to be a witness to the verbal or ritualistic articulation of a given myth theme. So these successive recordings of myth don't necessarily demonstrate its historical changes, however, but only expose the development of existing mythic thought. So the myth of the Garden of Eden and the story of the creation of humanity is a prime example of this. They rest upon this whole structure of binary oppositions that unfold in three versions. In the first, the binary opposition is sexual. Zachar u nekeva bara otam, the male and the female, he created them in Hebrew. That's Genesis 1:27. The next two versions describe the respective creation of man and woman. Man is created from the earth, the land that farmers till. It's forming an affinity between man and his labor. And this is explained by an etymological pun. You have to look at the words for Adam. Afar min Adamah, man from the dust of the earth. So Adam, which is man, afar min Adam, Adama. Sorry, just going through some Hebrew. That's man from the dust of the earth. The dust of the earth, ha-Adama. From Adam. Adam is man, ha-Adama, the dust of the earth. So the third version tells about the creation of woman outside of the Salah, whom the man names, employing a similar etymological pun. In Hebrew, again, it's an etymological pun. You got to look at Isha Kime Ish Luka. So the woman, for from the man she was taken. Woman, for from the man she was taken. So she is woman, Ishka Kime Ish Luka. And there's a pun in the Hebrew there, trust me. And so the man perceives her as basar, or flesh, projecting a male's sexual desire. So God created woman, and man was lusting after her already. Boom, it's in it. It's what we're made of. It's what we do. So here we find that there's an expansion of the initial gender opposition between male and female. In that first version of binary oppositions into an oppositional projection from man's perspective between matter and desire, and then labor and pleasure. So you see, man was created from the ground which he tills. Woman was created from the man. And so they're both created from matter, and they become desire, or labor and pleasure. So in addition to the binary oppositions that the biblical text articulates here, there's another that's implicit in the unfolding versions of the myth. In the instances of binary opposition, that tells us about the creation of woman. Human fertility is part of the story. But in the first version, God's blessing of fertility and increase is not confirmed. While in the third version, it's confirmed both as a punishment and as the singular attribute of the woman. She becomes the mother of all the living. That's the definition of Eve. And Adam becomes her individually, names her individually, employing the same literary device of the etymological pun, Eve. Vachira ha-Adam shem ishto hava ki hataya em kolhe. The man named his wife, Hawa, because she was the mother of all living, He. So Hawa and He, or Eve, comes from that. The name Hava in Hebrew puns with He, and both are a derivation of the root chai, to live. All right, so this is linguistic technicalities that I'm trying to talk you through on the radio as opposed to demonstrating them on a marker board or something like that. But this is showing how the names Adam, Eve, how they all meant something with the actual function. It's a literary pun work that's put into play in Genesis 1. So the man was made out of the earth. And the earth is part of man, and man is part of the earth, and yet man has to labor for the earth, and so on. But who is the woman of the first version of the binary opposition, whose fertility is not confirmed, and whom the Bible text doesn't even name? Doesn't call her Eve. Eve's not named until the second, and Adam and the rib and all of that, the rib or the penile bone, whichever way you want to look at it. But the first version doesn't mention that. Is it a repetition of the same story or two different stories is the question. And this is what has been looked at for millennia. This story has been looked at. So her fertility isn't confirmed, and whom the biblical text doesn't name. Her story seems to hover at the edges of literacy with these sporadic references. Isaiah mentions her name at one point, but not her mythic identity, referring to a demonic female in the desert. Wild cats shall meet hyenas, goat demons shall greet each other there, and there too the Lilith shall repose and find herself a resting place. That's Isaiah 34:14, which we read earlier. And it didn't have the word Lilith in there. Lilith is not capitalized there. It's not a proper name used. It's called the Lilith, like we've talked about the Satan or the angel or the this or the that. So the Lilith shall repose and find herself a resting place. So later in the post-biblical period, sages identify the Lilith several times, not by name but as the first Eve, indicating that her full story was well known in oral tradition, yet barred from the canonized biblical text. Remember what the canonized biblical text was? Remember when we were talking about the Nephilim? We were talking about the book of Enoch, talking about Emperor Constantine, who convoked the Council of Nicaea and several others, and many councils decided what books were going to be included in the Bible. They had to determine which were God-breathed and which were not. And the ones that weren't were thrown out, and the ones they had discord over couldn't decide unanimously, they put into the apocryphal books. And so the story of Lilith, the first Eve, was barred from the canonized biblical text. And finally, in the 10th century of the Common Era, A.D., in Babylon, an anonymous writer who was not bound by normative traditional principles and who included in his book some other sexually explicit tales, spelt out the Lilith's adventures in paradise. Sounds kind of like a weird movie for chicks, doesn't it? Chick flick. Lilith's Adventures in Paradise. And so the apocryphal work, known as the Tales of Ben Sira, which we talked about in the first segment, recounts Lilith's creation. And it goes like this. The young son of the king took ill. The king Nebuchadnezzar demanded, "Heal my son. If you don't, I will kill you." How would you like to be a doctor in ancient Babylon? Heal my son or I'll kill you. So Ben Sira immediately sat down and wrote an amulet with the holy name, and he inscribed on it the angels in charge of medicine by their names, form and images, and by their wings, hands, and feet. Nebuchadnezzar looked at the amulet. "Who are these?" Ben Sira answered, "The angels who were in charge of medicine." And we've mentioned these. We mentioned them in the first half. Those three angels with the weird names with not enough vowels in them. Snivi, 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 and Smingalingalaf. And after God created Adam, who was alone, I'm sure my pronunciation was off there, but SNVI is the first one. SNSVI is the second one. SMNGLOF is the third one. Go ahead and say those names fast 3 times. So after God created Adam, who was alone, he said, "It's not good for man to be alone." That's Genesis 2:18. And he created a woman for Adam from the earth, as he had created Adam himself, and called her Lilith. Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight, and she said, "I will not lie below." And he said, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top. For you are fit only to be on the bottom position, while I'm to be the superior one." I'm a guy. If you want the top, you can have the top. I'll take the top if you don't want it. But they apparently, the first couple in all of creation, according to Hebrew mythology, argued about what sexual position they were going to have. Who was going to be on top and who was going to be on bottom. And they weren't talking about bunk beds. And so Adam says, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top. For you are fit only to be on the bottom position, while I am to be in the superior position." And Lilith responded, "We are equal to each other, inasmuch as we were both created from the earth." But they would not listen to one another. And when Lilith saw this, she pronounced the ineffable name. That's the ineffable name of God, the unspeakable name, the unknowable name, the one that shall not be named. And she flew away into the air. And Adam stood in prayer before his Creator. Sovereign of the universe, he said, the woman who you gave me has run away. And at once the Holy One, blessed be he, sent these 3 angels to bring her back. Said the Holy One to Adam, if she agrees to come back, fine. If not, she must permit 100 of her children to die every day. The angels left God and pursued Lilith, whom they overtook in the midst of the sea, in the mighty waters where the Egyptians were destined to drown. And they told her God's word, but she did not wish to return. And the angels said, then we shall drown you in the sea. Leave me, Lilith said. I was created only to cause sickness to infants. If the infant is male, I have dominion over him for 8 days after his birth, and if female, for 20 days. And when the angels heard Lilith's words, they insisted she go back. But she swore to them by the name of the living God and the eternal God, whenever I see you or your names or your form in an amulet, I will have no power over the infant. And so she agreed to have 100 of her children die every day. Accordingly, every day, 100 demons perish. And for the same reason, we write the angels' names on the amulets of young children. When Lilith sees their names, she remembers her oath, and the children recover from their illnesses. So, since then, she seduces all men at night, and even scholars at their desks. She became the most explored and analyzed of demonesses. This Lilith. So, in their sexuality and fertility, Lilith and Eve are inversions of each other. Lilith has pleasure without children, and Eve delivers children not simply without pleasure, but in pain. That's the biblical text says, in pain you shall deliver children. So Lilith has pleasure without children, and Eve delivers children without pleasure, but only in pain. So narratologically, the Garden of Eden story consists of these several episodes that are embedded within each other. Regardless of whether the narrative is an editorial patchwork or a creative composition by a single hand, its storytelling art involves the interlocking of several themes told within possible frames, such as the account of the representation of nature and language. The creative acts of God, great as they are, require human recognition and affirmation, which are achieved through language. The story begins with 2 prefatory verses. The Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him. And the Lord God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and all the birds of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that would be its name. Then the actual story begins with the verb vaikra, and the man gives names, is what that means. That's Genesis 2:20, to all the creatures upon the earth. And concludes with the same verb, vaikra, the man named his wife, Eve. So 3 stories are embedded within this narrative of the first manifestation of human linguistic ability. A, the creation of the woman. B, the serpent of the Eden. And C, the expulsion from paradise. So the serpent in paradise may be a symbol of regeneration in Near Eastern cultures, or of immortality. The snake. Seen that, or Ouroboros, or I think that's how it's pronounced, the Ouroboros. The circle snake swallowing its own tail. Symbol of eternity, immortality, as some scholars suggest. But in particular, this story, it's a trickster, the Arum, the shrewdest, a ubiquitous figure of the transformation, with transformation in many other cultures. That's the Nakosh that you find in the Old Testament. Wittingly in the text, this adjective puns with the description of the naked Arumim, the Hebrew, sorry folks, Arumim, man and woman. The serpent does not give the man and the woman a lesson in sexual education. They were sexually active before they met. The serpent transforms nature into culture, making them aware of their nakedness, and in consequence of which they produced Veit Pura, the sewed, that which is sown, the sewing of, the clothing, differentiating them between them and the entire animal world. Following this transformation, God enters into a dialogue with both of them, and at the conclusion of which the man accuses his wife for their transformation from a natural to a cultural state. So the natural state was that Adam and Eve, supposedly man and woman, already were having sex, and plenty of it. Adam and Lilith argued about who got to be on top. Now, folks, I don't know if you ever argue with your partner about that. I don't really argue. We don't argue. Guys, we're guys. We don't argue about that. We're like, hey, wherever you want to be. Maybe women are the same. But this was one of the initial arguments. And why did that argument exist? Because they were doing it. They were having sex already. The Nakash, the serpent in the garden, did not introduce sex. What he introduced was taking it from natural to cultural. It was natural to have sex, natural to be naked, natural to do these things. Culture brought in, we need clothes to cover our nakedness. And that came after the fall. So what the serpent introduced was cultural elements, which is very interesting when you start looking at the study of that. So we mentioned Dundas and Zevit's interpretation of things earlier in this. Their interpretation of the woman creation story suggests that Adam consistently blames his wife in the story. The first time he speaks in his own voice after they're a couple, and it's in the context of sexual copulation. Both the Standard King James and the Jewish Publication Society translations render the Hebrew word davak as shall cleave or clings, respectively, cleaving to something. This is the man and woman shall cleave to each other. And while such a translation is physiologically and spiritually correct, the narrative context suggests that the verb refers to a graphic description of sexual intercourse. Did you catch that, Rainey? She just walked into the studio. What a perfect time. So since it's followed by the phrase, so that they became one flesh, Genesis 2:24. So this whole thing of sexual intercourse, the cleaving to, clinging to each other, that's what the Hebrew word davak meant. And the story suggests that Adam consistently blames his wife throughout the story. Now, ideally, intercourse is an act of love and couple harmony. But too often the man fails to recover himself, precisely at the point in which the woman wishes the continuation or the recurrence of her orgasmic bliss. Man doesn't recover from them. Man comes and goes, so to speak. So, for his failure to satisfy her, the man also accuses the woman. She's the bone of his bones, says Genesis 2:23. The bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones, which was removed from him, according to Dundas and Zevit's interpretation, thus preventing him, according to his thinking, from a prolonged intercourse like other animals. It's like lions, they can do it 20 times a day. So perhaps not accidentally, the Hebrew biblical term for orgasm is Edna, which goes back to the title of this whole thing, from Eden to Edna. It's a word constructed from the same roots as Eden, and the compound Hebrew term for paradise is Eden. The King James and the Jewish Publication Society translates this word Edna are pleasure and enjoyment, respectively. It's a constructed word from Eden, paradise. So the expulsion from paradise humanized Adam and Eve. Without his penal bone, man became less virile and the animals to which God made him superior, but he obtained a wife, a mate. So what really happened in the Garden of Eden was the creation of man and woman. Outside its gates, the family, the foundation of human culture, was created. Eve became not only Em-Kol-He, the mother of all living, but also the mother of humanity. Now, we got to be done because we're out of time. We can talk about this a little more if you'd like. A lot of stuff, a lot of technical information packed into this episode. So I hope that gives you a little better understanding of Lilith and who she was, and Eve, the creation story. We'll maybe talk more about this tomorrow and expand on this. But for now, we're out of here. Thanks for being here, folks.